Hi, welcome back to T For today's video, instead of talking to you about some of the books that I have read or some of the books that I want to read, I wanted to talk to you about some of the authors whose books I don't read anymore. And the inspiration behind this video is that I was thinking about how as we age, our taste evolved, and how sometimes as we age, we don't like the things that we used to like. And sometimes we end up liking things that we didn't like before. I was thinking about how when I was a young child, I didn't like dressing. My grandmother used to make dressing every Thanksgiving, and I tasted it one year and I'm like, this is disgusting. How could anybody eat this? But now that I'm older, I like dressing. I actually started liking dressing maybe 4 years ago, and I make my own dressing and I like it now. So as I think about how our taste evolved, I started thinking about some of the authors whose books I don't read anymore. And one of those authors is Johanna Lindsey. And it's crazy to think about how I don't like reading her books anymore, because I used to read her books so much. It was as if her books were a second life. It was like breathing for me to read her books. I used to love reading romance novels. And it's also crazy to think about how, as I was taking my creative writing courses, one of our prompts during the week where we had to answer questions that our instructors gave us, one of the prompts was we had to take an author who wrote like we wrote, not necessarily like that we mimicked, but that we wrote in the same type of writing style. And the author that I chose at the time was Charles Dickens, because I write in stream of consciousness, and he is one of my favorite authors. And so I took a passage from some of my writing, and I took a passage from his writing, and I shared that in my post. And it was funny because one of my classmates wrote back that you are no Charles Dickens. And I started to comment back that that was not the assignment. The teacher did not say who we were like, but somebody who wrote in the same style, but I deleted it because I didn't want to start any drama. But the thing is, the reason why I bring that up is because I recently wrote a novel about 2 years ago, and I had written a love scene. And so I grabbed one of my old Johanna Lindsey books, and I started looking at one of the love scenes to give me something to go by. And I started reading it, and I realized I write like Johanna Lindsey. And so it's crazy to think that as much as I love reading her work to the point that my writing style mimics hers, how I don't no longer want to read her books anymore. It's just crazy. But for some reason, I just don't want to read romance novels anymore. They don't interest me. For some reason, horror has taken its place in my heart now, and so has drama and realistic fiction. That's kind of the thing that I'm drawn to nowadays. So the second author whose books I don't read anymore are Dean Koontz. And that's kind of crazy to say, because if any of you who have been following me know that my first video was a Dean Koontz novel I reviewed Elsewhere by Dean Koontz. But I was disappointed with that. And Dean Koontz, like Johanna Lindsey, was one of my favorite authors growing up. It was always between him when it came to horror and suspense and thriller novels. It was between him and Stephen King. So if I wasn't reading Stephen King, I was reading Dean Koontz. And whenever Dean Koontz had a book come out, I had it. One of my favorite novels at that time was Odd Thomas. So it's kind of crazy how now when I pick up a Dean Koontz novel that I don't like reading it. And I don't think it has anything to do with age, but maybe it does. Maybe it's because I feel that as I've grown with age and how my taste has grown, Dean Koontz is still kind of stagnant. He's still writing like he did 10, 15 years ago. And I need more. I need an author that's willing to evolve with me. And I just don't think that he's willing to do that. I think even on Twitter, he's made the comment that he said and she said that, you know, the tags that come after dialogue, that he said that that's all that's necessary in writing, but writing has evolved. A lot of times writers nowadays omit the he said, she said, and just jump into John turned and stared out the window. You know, we don't use he said and she said as much as we did 10, 15 years ago. So I think that's one of the reasons why, even after trying to give Dean Koontz a chance over and over again, that I have pushed him to the back where he's on the bookshelf, and I'm not sure I'm going to give him another chance. I think I'm kind of done with Dean Koontz. Unless he comes out with something and everybody is raving about it, I think I'm pretty much done. So the third author whose book I no longer read anymore is V.C. Andrews, but that's not necessarily V.C.'s fault. The reason why I no longer read V.C. Andrews is because of something I found out when I purchased her book years ago. The last book I purchased, I was reading it, and the main character mentioned that she was allergic to peanut butter. However, as I read a little further within the book, I noticed that the character was mentioning that they were eating peanut butter crackers. And I'm thinking, okay, this makes no sense. This was like something that the author wrote that seemed to be monumental to the story. So I stopped reading the book and I started doing some research, and I found out that V.C. Andrews had died and that someone had taken over writing the story for her. And I'm not even sure that I even finished reading that book because I was so disappointed knowing that it wasn't V.C. Andrews writing this book. I mean, like some of you might know about The Flowers in the Attic and the subsequent stories written after that story about the kids that were put in the attic, about how they were raised and how they went on with their life. And that was just kind of disappointing to me. I didn't want to read another author. I didn't want to read somebody else's telling V.C. Andrews' story, trying to write like V.C. Andrews. And one of the things that I don't like is inconsistencies. And I find that it's poor, that it's in poor taste that another author could not be bothered to read the story and make sure that she kept up with the plot of the story. And so, like I said, I never finished reading that story, and I haven't picked up another V.C. Andrews book since. However, I did watch The Flowers in the Attic origin story that aired on Lifetime about a month ago, and I sat in the bed for, I think it was 8 hours straight watching each episode as it aired. And I did think that it was very interesting finding out the backstory of, I don't even remember her name, but it was the daughter who came back home and brought her kids and had them put in the attic because she was waiting for her father to die. But then again, of course, we know that she was trying to kill off her kids so she could get her father's inheritance, because the father in his will said that she could not get the money unless she didn't have any kids out of her marriage. So even though I did enjoy watching that miniseries, I still will not read another V.C. Andrews book. And the last authors whose books I no longer read is Charles Dickens. But of course, like V.C. Andrews, it's not his fault that I no longer read his books. It is because Charles Dickens no longer writes books. Charles Dickens is unfortunately dead, but I am a gigantic Charles Dickens lover. I love all things Charles Dickens. My favorite novel in the world is Great Expectations. And even as I've aged, Great Expectations has stayed with me. It's a novel that I can pick up today and start reading from the beginning to end. And even though I know what's going to happen, I'm still fascinated with his writing. I'm still fascinated with how he took this story and he created it. And it's something that stayed with me. It's something that has always stayed with me. And it's good to know that we, even as we age, even as we get older, even as our tastes change, that we still have something from our past, something that makes us us. And I don't know, that's just something good to have, something in today's age that I can have with me, that I can have this novel that still speaks to me, that this author still can weave a tale that fascinates me. So those are the 4 authors whose books I no longer read anymore, and I could probably think of a few more whose books that I used to read that I no longer care to read now. But those are the 4 that made a difference in my life, that stood out to me, that were there as part of my past, and that I kind of, think on in my future as how they made a difference in my life back then. So that concludes today's video, and I want to thank you all again for staying around. And until next time, as usual, I want you guys to take care, stay safe, and try to do something nice for a stranger so we can all do our part to try to make this world a better place.